in our society, one the retributivist, the other the utilitarian. Sometimes combinations of the two. A retributivist theory was articulated by Kant, articulated by Aquinas, but with a teleology involved. There's a purpose in punishment. Yeah, a redemptive purpose, hopefully. You'll see. But in our society, these are the two, and by and large, our penal institutions seem to operate on a utilitarian theory of punishment. There was, a few years ago, development in Britain which, building on a utilitarian ethic, advocated a therapeutic theory of punishment. That is to say, don't call it punishment at all, call it therapy. The idea being that the criminal is emotionally disturbed, socially maladjusted, so that what is needed is some kind of psychological therapy. And that created quite a stir because it seemed to minimize individual responsibility even more. You may be aware that C.S. Lewis has an article on that in the collection called God in the Dock, an article called The Humanitarian Theory of Punishment, because that was called the humanitarian theory. And his argument is that it just dehumanizes the person. It's not treating an individual as a person who did something, but as a cog in an environmental machine who didn't have any choice. You see? So the philosophical issue of freedom and determinism becomes very acute in that context. Well, Mill addresses the question of freedom and determinism, liberty and necessity. He, being anti-metaphysical, he has to reject necessitarianism. What he calls necessitarianism, sometimes nowadays called hard determinism. That is to say, there are sufficient causes for every human decision and action, such that no other decision or action could have occurred. Necessitarianism. The antecedent causes are both necessary and sufficient. Now, that's a view of causation which, as a phenomenalist, he couldn't hold. It would imply that we know what Hume called necessary connections. And he agreed with Hume that we don't. So what we have then is a rejection of necessitarianism. On the other hand, he isn't happy about libertarianism, nowadays usually called indeterminism. The view that human choices, the human will, is free and could choose other than it does. He doesn't like that. And he doesn't like it because of the constant conjunctions, Hume's term, the constant conjunctions we observe between motive and action, including act of will. That is to say, there are antecedent psychological factors which are necessary to the performance of any action. So there seems to be a constant conjunction between those antecedent factors and the action. We cannot say that they necessitate it. That's a metaphysical theory. We don't know that. So what he has is instead a kind of compatibilism, as it's sometimes called, or soft determinism. he wants to affirm that, yes, we do make decisions, we do make choices. In that sense, yes to will. A choice that's not constrained by external causes. But he denies that those choices are not constrained by, no, he denies that they're not due to internal causes. Well, and this, of course, this view here, this self-determinism, plainly feeds into his utilitarian ethic and so forth, because if it is the case that we respond to causal factors which on our general hypotheses will lead to pleasure or pain, then those factors to which we respond in making choices will influence accordingly, and a utilitarian approach is therefore the consequence. All right, his utilitarian ethics, Stumpf deals with that very adequately. He develops a theory of belief that's rather like the theory about liberty, that beliefs are not so much freely chosen as they are psychologically produced. Now, the roots of that are in Hume as well. Remember Hume's psychology of belief? Constant conjunctions accustom the mind to expecting certain things, or to thinking there is necessary connection. So he has a similar kind of psychology of belief to that of David Hume. Well, that's the picture in Mill, and you can see, I would hope quite clearly, the hypothetico-deductive method. Extended to the human sciences, yes, in talking about mind, in talking about liberty and necessity, in talking about ethics. You see? Yeah, you need your general hypotheses as premises if you're going to predict the pleasure-pain consequences of a certain action and do your utilitarian decisions. So the extension of it to the human science is pretty plain, and likewise the phenomenon. Okay, Mill? I can't quite get it, Esther.
Like when you talk about his view, like led to disillusioning with himself, because you're always having these
Yes.
possibilities.
Yes.
None of them will ever be actualized. It will always just be possibilities. Or like how do you, like what do you mean exactly by limited possibilities?
Okay. Don't confuse his use of the word possibility with that of an Aristotelian, where the possible is in the process of becoming an actual. You see? All he means by permanent possibility of sensations is that when we talk about chair, a desk, an ink marker, a human body, what we're saying is we think that such things are visible, tangible. You see? Notice the ending: visible, tangible, audible, touchable. You see? That is to say, if there are such things as material bodies, then as long as there are, there's the possibility of sense experiences. That's all. Now, whether you, ever have sense experiences of that particular sort, whether I ever see Esther again, you see. That's a contingent matter. But to say Esther's real, she's alive, bodily existence, is saying no more than she's a visible being. But matter in the sense of the Newtonian spatial occupant, that's something else. That's something we can't affirm. Now, similarly with mind. When I talk about your mind, or when you talk about your mind, you are in effect saying that having a mind means that you will have all sorts of states of consciousness that you can reflect on. Now, whether you do or not depends on whether you stay awake long enough. That's a contingent matter. But to have a mind is to reflect. What is it that Descartes said? A thinking thing. Now what Mill's doing is dropping off the thing and just keeping the thinking. It's just that. Avoiding the metaphysical hypothesis, sticking with the empirical hypothesis. Yeah, now that may sound a little bit strange, but if you are trying to talk of human beings in purely empirical terms, how else would you do it? Well, the only way you can talk of human beings is in terms of physical sense data and reflective data. You see? The bodily story told in terms of physical sense data, the inner mental story told in terms of reflective data. That's all the empirical input we have about human beings. Is that clear enough? Okay. Let me add just a comment or two about Ernst Mach. He died in 1916, an Austrian physicist. The two things that he's important for, two things. One is his sensationalism, as it's usually called. He wrote a book called The Analysis of Sensations, in which he said we can analyze every object of experience into the sense qualities that are observable. So he wants to do the same as Mill, to describe phenomenal objects, the objects of experience, in terms only of sense data. And in that sense, the world consists, our world, our scientific world, consists of nothing but sensations, sense qualities. No non-empirical metaphysical assertions are acceptable in science. The second thing that he's important for comes out in a book of his on